The paradox of divine foreknowledge is a paradox in the philosophy of religion, and it has to do with the idea that God is all-knowing or omniscient. So the idea that God knows everything is pretty standard in the history of theology back to Augustine and Boethius, who we're talking about. Now, the basic idea is that due to your limitations as a human being, you are wandering along this timeline that starts in the past and moves towards the future. And here you are having some kind of definite knowledge about the past, but not what is to come. Now, we might attribute that to the fact that you have some kind of freedom about what's going to happen, and that's going to pop up too. But just to start, God is not limited by your finite human perspective. So when we say that God knows everything, we mean everything that has happened, will happen, or is going to happen. That is to say, in order to be all-knowing, God doesn't just need to know about everything that is now or everything that has ever happened, but God also needs to know about everything that will happen, like everything, or else God can't count as all-knowing. But the question is whether the concept itself is internally consistent, or if we're going to end up contradicting ourselves. And here, it's a problem because if God knows everything about the future, particularly, then that seems to bring in the doubt the idea of human free will. Think about it. If God knows everything, that means God knows about the future. And if we want to get technical, we wouldn't say that it's even the future for God, because God is a thing that exists outside of time and therefore doesn't make these human distinctions between things that have happened, happening, will happen, like we do. The only reason we do that is because we can't conceive of everything all at once, but God can. That's what God's omniscience is, the fact that everything is for him known. We wouldn't say at the same time even, because time is just for us. But if everything in existence is co-eternal with the divine, such that as God makes things, he knows about them, and that includes everything that we would say takes place over time, then God will definitely know about what we are calling the future here, right? But the idea that it is the future is just part of our limited knowledge. Now, we like to think that in the future we have some kind of control over what's going to happen, or that is to say, we have free will. So, consider something that I plan to do tomorrow. I plan to buy cat food tomorrow. And obviously God knows. But not only does God know about my plan, God knows whether I'll actually make it to the store or not. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that God knows I will buy cat food. Now, if that's going to happen on our timeline, if God knows about it, and all of God's knowledge is true, and that's going to be important, then it seems that I have no other option than to go buy the cat food. And if you take this to the extreme, God's knowing about the future forced me to go to the store and buy cat food. I had no choice in the matter. It was already always going to happen, and God knew that. Any theory about free will that I had, or any notions that I had some choice in the matter, are just an illusion for me, because I don't have the knowledge that God has. So if God knows, and it has always been the case, that tomorrow I will buy cat food, what choice did I really have? Now that's going to threaten our concept of free will, and a problem is that the people who believe in God's omniscience tend also to believe that there is such a thing as human free will, that is one of the things that makes us human, that we do make choices, and God will judge us based on those choices. But if this is true, if I can't make choices, then how can God judge me for the choices that, in a sense, God forced me to make, right? So that's one side of the argument. So to state it extremely, if God is omniscient, God knows about the future, God knows I will buy cat food, then God's knowledge forced me to buy cat food. So this is our worry, that if you conceive of God as all-knowing, then we're going to end up with conclusions like, God forced me to buy cat food when I thought I had free will to buy or not buy cat food. And in order to understand what's really going on here, we need to remember the correspondence theory of truth. The correspondence theory of truth says that something is true if it corresponds to an actually existing state of affairs or something in the world, right? So something is true if, and only if, it corresponds to reality. So when I say something like, I'm wearing a jacket, you can tell if it's true or not by looking to see whether I am wearing a jacket. And I am. Therefore, because I am wearing the jacket, the statement that says I am wearing a jacket will be true. Now, God's knowledge is supposed to be true. On what basis do we determine it to be true is the question when we are talking about the future, which for us doesn't exist yet. If God is going to be knowing true things about the future, then it seems that there must be a way in which those things, supposedly in the future, already exist. Otherwise, God's knowledge wouldn't be about anything, and it couldn't be true. But we want God's knowledge to be true, right? Therefore, everything that will happen in the future, according to our perspective, has already happened or is happening from God's perspective. Where's the freedom? What choice can I make about something that is already happening or has already happened? If the future already exists in such a way that at least God can make true statements about it, then I don't seem to have any capacity to change what's going to happen. Now, Boethius' answer to this problem is pretty clever. We have to, according to Boethius, reconceive of what it is that God knows exactly. So let's consider our example again. So it's true that I will buy cat food tomorrow, and this is what God knows, right? So our concern is that because God knows it, I have to buy cat food tomorrow, or else his knowledge wouldn't be true. Boethius thinks that we can add a word in here and just make our problem go away. Because what if it isn't just the case that God knows I will buy cat food? What if it's the case that God knows that I will buy cat food of my own free will? So God doesn't just know that I'm going to buy cat food tomorrow. What he in fact knows is that I am going to buy cat food freely, that I make a free choice to go to the store and buy some cat food. What if that is what God knows? If that were the case, then to claim that we don't have free will would make God's knowledge false, in which case we couldn't say God was all-knowing. And within this conceptual framework, you can't question whether God is all-knowing, because that's blasphemy. Now, in order to retain the concepts that God is both all-knowing and that humans have free will, Boethius does this. He presents a solution that God knows that we will do things freely.